In the late 1970s, rock music was changing fast. Punk had stripped things down, disco dominated dance floors, and some critics thought hard rock was becoming heavy, slow, and predictable. Then a band from Pasadena, California, arrived with a sound that felt both reckless and impossibly precise. Van Halen did not simply play loud rock songs. They turned rock into a high-wire act, fast guitars, arena-sized choruses, explosive drums, and a frontman who treated every stage like a circus ring. At the center was Eddie Van Halen, a guitarist whose technique sounded so new that listeners argued over how it was even possible. But Van Halen's story is more than one genius guitarist. It is a story of brothers, showmanship, reinvention, massive commercial success, and the tension between personality and chemistry that made the band thrilling, unstable, and unforgettable. Van Halen formed in Pasadena in 1972, built around brothers Eddie and Alex Van Halen. Eddie became the guitarist, keyboardist, backing vocalist, and primary songwriter, while Alex anchored the group on drums. They eventually found the classic lineup that fans still picture first: David Lee Roth on lead vocals and Michael Anthony on bass. That combination mattered. Eddie brought dazzling musical invention, Alex brought force and swing, Anthony added melodic bass support and high backing vocals, and Roth supplied attitude, humor, and a larger-than-life stage persona. In the beginning, they were not industry royalty. They were a working local band, playing parties and clubs, sharpening their act in front of real crowds. That live grind shaped them. Their songs were designed not only to be heard, but to hit instantly in a room full of people. The band's self-titled debut album, released in February 1978, was the moment Van Halen's local electricity became a national shock. It reached number 19 on the Billboard 200, but its long-term impact was far bigger than a chart position. The album eventually sold more than 10 million copies in the United States, earning diamond certification from the RIAA. What made it so powerful was the way it captured danger and discipline at the same time. It sounded raw, but not sloppy. It felt spontaneous, yet the arrangements were tight. Eddie's guitar playing became the obvious headline, especially because it introduced mainstream rock audiences to techniques that seemed almost supernatural. But the whole band made the record work. Roth's voice and personality gave the music a grin, Anthony's backing vocals made hooks brighter, and Alex's drumming kept the songs moving like machinery with a pulse. Eddie Van Halen's importance is hard to overstate because he changed not just what guitarists played, but what they imagined the instrument could do. His virtuosity was not only about speed. It was about tone, rhythm, invention, and surprise. He could make the guitar scream, chatter, sing, and sparkle within the same song. His playing helped restore hard rock to the front of the music scene because it gave the genre a fresh vocabulary. After Van Halen's debut, young guitarists everywhere tried to decode his sound. They studied his phrasing, his tapping, his harmonics, and his explosive approach to solos. But what many imitators missed was that Eddie's flash served the song. He was a showman, but also a songwriter. His technical brilliance did not float above Van Halen's music, it powered it from within. After the debut, Van Halen moved quickly. By 1982, they had released 4 more albums: Van Halen 2, Women and Children First, Fair Warning, and Diver Down. Over time, each became multi-platinum, proving that the first album was not a lucky accident. This period showed the band refining its identity while refusing to become too polished. Van Halen 2 kept the party rock momentum going. Women and Children First sounded heavier and more confident. Fair Warning leaned darker and more aggressive, often becoming a favorite among fans who liked the band's harder edge. Diver Down mixed originals with covers, emphasizing their ability to turn familiar songs into Van Halen-style celebrations. Together, these albums made the band one of the most commercially successful rock acts of the early 1980s. They were not chasing trends, they were becoming one. Then came 1984, the album that pushed Van Halen from massive rock act to pop culture phenomenon. Released in January 1984, It eventually sold 10 million copies in the United States and produced 4 successful singles. Its biggest song, Jump, became the band's only #1 single on the Billboard Hot 100. What made Jump so important was its keyboard-driven sound. Eddie had always been more than a guitarist, but to many casual listeners, Van Halen meant guitar fireworks. Jump proved the band could expand its sound without losing its personality. The song was bright, immediate, and stadium-sized. For some fans, the keyboards signaled a controversial shift. For millions of listeners, they made Van Halen even more accessible. The album captured a band at its commercial peak, balancing hard rock, pop hooks, technical skill, and MTV-era visibility. But success did not make Van Halen stable. In 1985, David Lee Roth left to begin a solo career. This could have ended the band's run, because Roth was not a replaceable frontman in the usual sense. His charisma had become part of Van Halen's identity. He brought swagger, comedy, and theatrical bravado. Replacing him meant asking fans to accept not just a new singer, but a new emotional center. The band chose Sammy Hagar, formerly of Montrose, and the decision changed Van Halen's direction without destroying its commercial power. Hagar had a different voice, a different personality, and a different songwriting presence. Where Roth often felt like a wild master of ceremonies, Hagar brought a more straightforward melodic rock approach. The question was whether Van Halen could survive becoming a different version of itself. The Sammy Hagar era answered that question with extraordinary commercial results. With Hagar, Van Halen released 4 U.S. #1 multi-platinum studio albums across 11 years, 5,150 in 1986, OU 812 in 1988, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge in 1991, and Balance in 1995. This era is sometimes debated by fans because it sounded different from the Roth years, but its success is undeniable. The songs often leaned more into melody, keyboards, and polished arena rock. Hagar's voice gave the band a smoother, more direct emotional range, and Eddie's songwriting continued to evolve. Instead of collapsing after losing a defining frontman, Van Halen became one of the rare rock bands to achieve major success with 2 distinct lead singers. That accomplishment is central to understanding their legacy. They did not merely survive a lineup change, they built a second empire. By the early 1990s, Van Halen were veterans, but still major players. Their 1993 live album, Live, Right Here, Right Now, went double platinum and captured the scale of the Hagar-era machine. Live performance had always been central to the band's identity. From Pasadena clubs to giant arenas, Van Halen's music was designed to move bodies and overwhelm senses. On stage, Eddie's guitar heroics became communal events, Alex's drums gave the spectacle weight, and the singer, whether Roth or Hagar, had to command a room the size of a small city. But behind the success, the familiar pressures of personality, control, and direction continued. Hagar left in 1996, shortly before the release of Best of Volume 1, the band's first greatest hits collection. Once again, Van Halen faced the dangerous question of who they were without their current voice. The next chapter was brief and difficult. Gary Cherone, best known as the frontman of Extreme, replaced Hagar and recorded Van Halen 3 with the band in 1998. On paper, Cherone was a capable singer with rock credibility. In practice, the album struggled commercially and did not connect with audiences the way earlier Van Halen records had. Part of the challenge was timing. By the late 1990s, the rock landscape had changed dramatically, with alternative rock, grunge, and newer sounds reshaping what listeners expected from guitar bands. Another challenge was identity. After 2 highly successful vocal eras, a third version of Van Halen was harder for fans to embrace. Cherone and the band parted ways in 1999, and Van Halen entered a period of uncertainty. For a band once defined by momentum, silence became part of the story. Van Halen returned to activity in stages. The band reunited with Sammy Hagar in 2003, launched a worldwide tour in 2004, and released the double-disc Greatest Hits collection The Best of Both Worlds. But the reunion did not become a permanent reset. Hagar left again after the tour. Then, in 2006, David Lee Roth returned, creating enormous excitement among fans who had waited decades to see the original frontman back with Eddie and Alex. Yet it was not a full classic lineup reunion. Michael Anthony was replaced on bass by Eddie's son, Wolfgang Van Halen. This decision was controversial for some longtime fans, because Anthony's backing vocals and presence had been a major part of the original sound. But it also made the band a family unit in a new way, placing Eddie's musical legacy directly beside his son on stage. In 2012, Van Halen released their final studio album, A Different Kind of Truth. It was the band's first album with David Lee Roth in 28 years and the only Van Halen studio album to feature Wolfgang. The album was critically and commercially successful, which mattered because it showed that the band's history was not only nostalgia. Even after decades of lineup changes and industry shifts, there was still demand for new Van Halen music with Roth's personality and Eddie's guitar at the center. The record also served as a late-career reminder of what had made the band special in the first place: elastic riffs, high energy, eccentric hooks, and musicianship that balanced discipline with abandon. It did not erase the complications of the band's later years, but it gave the story one final studio chapter with real force. Eddie Van Halen had been diagnosed with cancer in 2001, and on October 6, 2020, he died from the disease. His death marked more than the loss of a famous guitarist. It ended the creative engine that had defined Van Halen from the beginning. A month later, Wolfgang Van Halen confirmed that the band had disbanded. The numbers help explain the scale of what they left behind: 56 million albums sold in the United States, more than 80 million worldwide, and a place among the best-selling groups of all time. As of 2019, Van Halen ranked 20th on the RIAA's list of best-selling artists in the United States. They charted 13 #1 hits on Billboard's mainstream rock chart, and VH1 ranked them 7th among the 100 greatest hard rock artists. But the deeper legacy is cultural. Van Halen made hard rock feel athletic, joyful, dangerous, and futuristic. They proved a band could reinvent itself and still dominate. And Eddie's guitar changed the sound of rock so completely that every generation after him had to respond to it. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.